Right now, somewhere in your city, a person your age is living the life you think you should have. Bigger house, better body, calmer marriage, a face that does not look tired in photographs. You do not know this person. You have maybe never met them. But you carry them with you anyway into your mornings, into your mirror, into the quiet second before you fall asleep. Here is the harsh truth. You are not comparing yourself to a real human being. You are comparing yourself to a highlight reel, a curated fragment, a story someone else chose to tell about themselves. And you are losing to a ghost. The ancient Stoics had a word for this sickness. They did not call it envy, though envy is close. They called it a failure to understand what is actually yours and what was never yours to begin with. 2,000 years ago, a man was exiled from everything he had built. His career, his reputation, his place among the powerful, all stripped away while the men who once called him a rival kept climbing without him. He had every reason to spend his exile in bitterness, tallying what others had that he did not. He did the opposite. And what he wrote from that exile still has the power to dismantle the exact comparison trap you are living inside right now. Comparison is not a harmless habit. It is a slow theft. It steals your attention from the only life you can actually live and hands it to a life you can never verify. By the end of this, you will understand exactly how that theft works and exactly how to stop it. Stay with me. This one might sting a little before it sets you free. In the year 41 AD, a Roman philosopher and rising political star named Lucius Annaeus Seneca stood near the height of his public life. He was known throughout Rome for his sharp mind, his eloquence in the Senate, and his growing reputation as both a statesman and a thinker. He had spent years building himself into someone the empire noticed, a man moving deliberately toward influence. Then, in a single season, it collapsed. The new emperor, Claudius, had Seneca accused of an affair with Julia Livilla, the emperor's own niece. The charge was almost certainly politically motivated. It was a convenient way to remove a man whose growing influence had made him inconvenient to people with more power than he had. The Senate, controlled by forces loyal to Claudius, condemned him. The sentence was exile. Not to a comfortable villa outside Rome, but to Corsica, a rugged, sparsely populated island in the Mediterranean, far from the marble halls where his reputation had been built. Picture what this meant for a man like Seneca. Everyone he had once stood beside in the Senate chamber continued their lives without him. Men with lesser minds, by his own private judgment, kept their titles, kept their invitations, and kept their proximity to power. Meanwhile, he was left on a cold island, stripped of rank, watching from a distance as the machinery of Roman ambition turned without him in it. Corsica in the 1st century was nothing like Rome. No forums, no marble, no crowds gathering to hear a gifted speaker turn a phrase. Historical accounts describe the island as rugged and thinly populated. Its interior was wild, and its coastline was exposed to hard Mediterranean winds. For a man who had spent his adult life at the center of the most sophisticated city in the known world, the silence alone would have been its own kind of sentence. No senators to debate. No audience to persuade. Only the sea, the rock, and his own mind, with nowhere left to perform for anyone. This is the exact psychological trap most people never escape. Not exile itself, but comparison during loss. When the mind is wounded, it does not simply grieve what it lost. It measures. It counts what others still have. It runs the arithmetic of unfairness over and over, and each calculation adds a fresh cut to an already open wound. It would have been easy, even reasonable, for Seneca to spend those first months doing exactly that. Replaying every name promoted in his absence. Counting every honor he was no longer present to receive. Watching every rival whose star was rising precisely because his had fallen. But something remarkable happened on that island. Seneca did not spend his exile compiling a ledger of what he had lost relative to his former peers. Instead, he wrote. Among the surviving works from this period is a letter of consolation addressed to his own mother, Helvia. It was written specifically to ease her grief over his banishment, a document historians still study today as one of the clearest windows into Stoic thought under real hardship. In it, Seneca does not pretend Corsica is pleasant. He does not perform false cheerfulness. What he does instead, and this is the turn the whole story hinges on, is separate what has genuinely been taken from him from what merely feels taken. His titles, his properties, his standing in the eyes of Roman society, these, he argues, were never truly his in the deepest sense. They were on loan from circumstance. What remained fully his, untouched by exile, untouched by any senator's jealousy or any emperor's decree, was his mind. His capacity to reason, to reflect, to remain a philosopher whether anyone in Rome was watching or not. He reframes his circumstances not by minimizing his loss, but by relocating his sense of worth entirely. If his value as a man depended on his rank relative to other Roman elites, then exile had, in fact, destroyed him. But if his value depended on the steadiness of his own judgment, a thing no senator, no emperor, no rival could touch, then Corsica had taken nothing essential at all. Notice what this reframing required. It was not denial. Seneca does not claim the island was pleasant, or that losing his standing did not sting. The shift was more precise than that. It was a deliberate act of sorting his losses into two piles. In one pile were things that were genuinely gone, where grieving them honestly was appropriate. In the other pile were things that only felt gone because he had, for years, mistaken another man's opinion of him for his own worth. Untangling those two piles, letter by letter, page by page, was the actual work of his exile. It was far harder than any Senate debate he had ever won. He spent 8 years on that island. 8 years during which former colleagues rose in influence, accumulated wealth, secured legacies, and were seen constantly in the places that mattered to Roman society. Seneca was seen by almost no one. And yet, when he was finally recalled to Rome in 49 AD, he did not return broken by comparison, or hollowed out by 8 years of watching others advance. He returned as one of the most formidable philosophical minds the empire had ever produced. A man whose later letters to his friend Lucilius would go on to become some of the most enduring writing in the entire Stoic tradition, still read and taught nearly 2,000 years later, long after the names of the courtiers who outranked him on Corsica have faded from history entirely. The men who outpaced him in the Senate during those 8 years? History barely remembers most of their names. Let us slow down and take this story apart, because underneath it is a mechanism that governs your mind right now, in this century, on that phone in your hand. Modern psychologists have a name for what nearly destroyed Seneca on that island, and what quietly corrodes you every time you open an app before breakfast: social comparison. The theory, first formally described by psychologist Leon Festinger in 1954, argues that human beings evaluate their own worth largely by measuring themselves against others. Not against some fixed internal standard, but against a constantly shifting external one. And here is the trap built into that mechanism. The standard never holds still. There is always someone further ahead. Which means a mind organized around comparison is a mind that can never, structurally, arrive at peace. It is chasing a finish line that moves every time it gets close. Seneca understood this 2,000 years before Festinger had the data to prove it. His solution was not to win the comparison. It was to exit the game entirely. He relocated his sense of value away from anything measured relative to other people, and towards something the Stoics called optuos. Your rank, your possessions, your follower count, the size of someone else's house, these live in the category of externals. They depend on circumstance, luck, timing, and the choices of other people. Your judgment, your effort, your character, your response to what happens to you, these live in the category of what is entirely, permanently yours. Nobody can outrank you at being you. This is not a comforting platitude. It is a precise psychological reallocation of attention. When you compare yourself to someone else's external life, you are, quite literally, spending your limited attention evaluating a category of things you were never designed to control. It is like judging your skill as a sailor by the weather instead of your seamanship. There is a deeper layer here too, and it is the one most people miss. Comparison does not just waste your attention. It actively distorts your perception of your own life. Psychologists call this the reference point problem. Your brain does not evaluate your salary, your body, or your relationship in isolation. It evaluates them relative to whatever reference point is currently loudest in your environment. Scroll past enough curated wealth, and your ordinary, genuinely good life will start to feel like failure. Not because anything about your life changed, but because your reference point silently shifted underneath you. Seneca, isolated on Corsica, had almost no access to Rome's reference points. In some strange way, exile forced a clarity that comfort had prevented. Without the constant visual evidence of his former peers' advancement, he was finally free to measure his life against his own standard rather than theirs. There is one more layer worth naming because it explains why comparison feels so physically urgent, almost like a threat, rather than a simple observation. Human beings evolved in small tribal groups where relative status genuinely determined survival, access to food, to mates, and to protection. Falling behind the group was not an abstract inconvenience. It could be fatal. Your nervous system still carries that ancient wiring. It still treats social comparison less like information and more like a threat alarm. That is why seeing someone else's success can trigger something closer to fear than mere disappointment. A tightening in the chest, a spike of urgency, the sense that you must act immediately. Understanding this does not make the feeling disappear, but it lets you recognize the sensation for what it actually is. Not a verdict on your worth, but an outdated alarm firing in a world that was never built to read correctly. You do not need exile to get that same clarity. You need discipline. It is the deliberate, repeated act of noticing when your mind has quietly swapped your own standard for someone else's and pulling it back. That is a trainable skill, no different from training a muscle through repetition. Here is where philosophy becomes practice. For exercises drawn directly from Stoic method, each one built to interrupt the comparison reflex before it can take root in your day. Step 1. The view from above. Marcus Aurelius, in his private notebook meditations, repeatedly practiced a mental exercise where he imagined viewing human affairs from a great height. Cities, borders, and humans striving shrinking into insignificance below him. Modern Stoic teachers call this the view from above. When you catch yourself comparing your life to someone else's, their car, their relationship, or their apparent success, stop and mentally pull the camera back. Picture your street from above, then your city, then the country, the continent, and the curve of the earth itself. Hold that image for 10 to 15 seconds. What you are doing, mechanically, is disrupting the narrow zoom that comparison requires. Comparison only works at close range, where one specific detail of someone else's life can be held directly against one specific detail of yours. Zoom out far enough, and the comparison simply cannot survive the distance. Practice this daily, not just in painful moments. On a walk, before bed, during a commute, so the mental muscle is already built before you need it in a crisis of envy. Say a former classmate posts about buying their first home, and you feel that familiar drop in your stomach. Instead of scrolling to the next post while the feeling festers, stop. Close your eyes if you can. Picture your neighborhood from above, the rooftops, the streets, the small moving shapes of cars and people. Now pull back further. Your city as a single cluster of light against dark countryside. Further still, the coastline, the curve of the land meeting the sea. Hold it. In that view, the home purchase that felt enormous seconds ago becomes one small, ordinary event among billions happening on the same afternoon. Most of which you will never see, and none of which changes anything about your own path forward. Step 2. The dichotomy of control audit. Epictetus, who began his life enslaved and later became one of the most respected philosophy teachers in Rome, opened his work with what may be the single most practical sentence in all of Stoic literature. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Turn this into a nightly 2-minute audit. Take whatever comparison thought bothered you that day, a colleague's promotion, a friend's vacation, or a stranger's physique, and write it down. Next to it, list every element of that situation and mark each one either up to me or not up to me. Their promotion, not up to you. Your preparation, your skill development, your effort at your own work, entirely up to you. This simple written audit does something your racing thoughts cannot do alone. It makes the boundary between your responsibility and someone else's circumstance visible, concrete, and impossible to blur back together. Do this for 30 days and you will notice the comparison thoughts arriving with far less emotional force, because you have trained your mind to immediately sort them into the category where they cannot hurt you. A worked example. Your comparison thought is, a colleague just got promoted over me. Break it down. Their promotion decision, not up to you. The politics of the department, not up to you. Their years of experience, not up to you. But your visibility to leadership going forward, up to you. The skills you choose to build this quarter, up to you. The way you respond to this specific disappointment, professionally and privately, entirely up to you. Once written out this way, the thought stops feeling like one heavy fact and starts looking like what it actually is. Mostly circumstance with a small, workable core that belongs to you alone. Step 3. The internal scorecard. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, repeatedly urged his friend to measure his progress against his former self rather than against his neighbors. Real growth means becoming better than who you were yesterday, not better than someone else today. Build yourself a literal internal scorecard. Each evening, ask 3 questions. Where did I show more discipline today than I did a month ago? Where did I show less patience than I want to? What is one specific thing I did today that only my past self would find impressive? This is not self-congratulation. It is data collection against the only baseline that is philosophically valid: your own trajectory. External comparison compares you to a stranger's chapter 20 while you are living your chapter 3. Internal comparison compares chapter 3 of your life to chapter 2. That is the only comparison that can ever produce useful information. Keep this scorecard somewhere physical, in a notebook, not an app, so it cannot quietly turn into another feed to scroll and compare against. After a few weeks, read back through it. You will start to notice a pattern most people never get to see about themselves. Real, specific evidence of growth that no outside algorithm was ever going to show you. Because no algorithm is tracking your patience improving or your discipline compounding. Only you are positioned to see that data. Collect it deliberately, and it becomes very hard for a stranger's highlight reel to outweigh a stack of your own honest evidence. Step 4. The evening review. Seneca described a nightly habit of reviewing his day before sleep, questioning himself honestly about what he had done well, what he had done poorly, and what he could correct. Adapt this specifically for comparison. Before bed, ask yourself, did I lose any part of today to envy, resentment, or measuring myself against someone I do not even know? So, do not punish yourself for it. That only adds a second layer of self-criticism on top of the first wound. Simply name it. Today, I spent 40 minutes feeling behind because of what I saw online. Naming it precisely, out loud or on paper, strips it of its vague emotional power. Vague envy feels enormous. Named specific envy, 40 minutes, one app, one person's vacation photos, becomes something you can actually address tomorrow because you can see its exact size. Practice these 4 consistently, and something will shift that no external achievement could ever produce. Your peace will stop depending on where you rank. Here is the thought I want you to carry out of this text because it is the one that actually matters. You will never see the full life of the person you are comparing yourself to. Not their private grief, not their quiet failures, not the version of exile they are carrying that simply does not show up in the frame you were given. You are comparing your entire, complicated, 3-dimensional life to somebody else's highlight reel, and calling the result a fair measurement. It was never fair. It was never even real. Seneca lost everything Rome could take from a man, and still found a way to write words that would outlast every senator who outranked him that year. Not because he stopped caring about his life, but because he stopped measuring it against someone else's. Your life is not a smaller version of someone else's story. It is the only version of yours. Nobody else is qualified to live it, and nobody else's chapter can tell you whether yours is going well. Think back to that colleague, that classmate, or that stranger online whose life you have been quietly measuring yourself against. You do not know what they lie awake worrying about. You do not know what they have buried or what it cost them to build whatever you are admiring from a distance. You are standing in front of a locked door, guessing at the furniture inside and calling your guess the truth. Put the mirror down. Pick up the only measurement that was ever honest. Who you were yesterday and who you are choosing to become today. That comparison, and only that one, is fair. It is the only one where you actually have all the facts. That is where the comparison ends. Walk your own road.